sorry to keep you waiting. It's been quite a year, hasn't it? A lot's happened in that time. But right now, we got 16 death battles to review, 100 points to scale each score, over 1,000 words of script to read out, and quintize as many comments to shut up. So, Death Battle released 192 episodes across its first 10 seasons. Those are pretty good, weren't they? But as they rose from Rooster Teeth's tomb 3 days or 5 months after their second parent company closed, they finally declared their independence. And we're gonna be looking at some big bangers, big stinkers, and big hot takes. And instead of just having one fully scripted rundown, we're gonna make it 16 fully scripted reviews. That's right, braggers. Death Battle has gotten so good that I needed to improve my writing style. Funny how much of a Cinderella story this became, huh? Before their independence, people said they would break. They said they would lose. But look at us now. What else is new? Well, I'll tell you what's new. Death Battle is finally back! It's been great to see Death Battle not just keep on kicking, but also kick its starter goal by damn near 1,000% of its power. Holy crap, Lois! It also meant that they were left with less people working on the show, given that they couldn't have Rooster Teeth's animators helping out with various episodes, meaning that they had to rely on their own manpower and freelancers. So to quickly answer as to whether or not I like this era as much as Season 10, I don't, and I may or may not like Season 6 more, but that's just me. There were other people who adored these episodes, even its weaker ones. Death Battle has consistently been improving their analyses, their animations, the music, and even their versus scaling and research, while maintaining the same level of charm it used to have.
Oh, is that when she's unconscious?
Not that one. And what matters more is that they brought people back as they changed for the better. Maybe even inspiring others to change as well. Just like me. Because, you know, there's always the whole Death Battle YouTuber thing where it's like, okay, so I'm gonna be reviewing this episode under the pretense of not being familiar with either character. But you know what? I was like, tough titties, I'm not gonna fall under that trope anymore. Before and while making this video, I made sure to familiarize myself with every combatant from this lineup. In other words, I finally read the Spawn comics for the first time. I also watched the My Hero Academia anime, and also made sure to keep tabs on whatever differences it made from the manga. I got around to playing the Halo and Doom games, specifically the Slayer saga for the latter, admittedly. I also watched a bunch of Godzilla films from varying eras, as well as Godzilla Singular Point. I also watched the first 2 seasons of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. The Devil May Cry games and Final Fantasy XVI were already on my 2025 media bingo card, so thankfully, playing those games gave me a new perspective to consider. And I also made sure to read, not watch, but read Soul Eater and Yu-Gi-Oh! On top of reading a bunch of comics for Ghost Rider, Kyle Rayner, Miles Morales, Hulk, and Blade. Every other series not mentioned is something I'm already familiar with. But just in case, I revisited a couple of them just to refresh myself on everything. I did all of this in the span of about 6 months, which included my established reading of the Sonic the Hedgehog IDW comics from my last video. Never call me a bad YouTuber again. Obviously, this doesn't automatically make me an expert on these characters, let alone the series. In fact, I had to make sure I got a good reading list thanks to these people right here that you're seeing on screen. Seriously, I cannot thank these bros enough. They were very clutch when it came to helping me with this research. But rather, I did this so I could figure out what I am personally looking for in an episode and explain my arguments in better faith. Though that's not the only new thing in my life. As you can see, I got around to renovating the Chaos Theater, then I merged it with Killland, and then I reshaped it into a less complex multiverse, if you will. Oh yeah, and I also adopted a new flag. Oh, and this? Hey, if Darkseid's allowed to have an infinite number of avatars for his true form, I don't see why I can't. Though my old avatar is still around, in case you're wondering, mainly in chibi form, as seen in these emotes that members get the rights to use, but he'll still show up in his original form from time to time. I just kinda let them do their own thing at this point. Oh, look! There he is! Great. Another Dragon Ball Salt Fest. When we last left the older Frostathan avatar, we saw a brief first impressions of Omni Man versus Bardock. Despite the episode's premiere being a gorilla's worst nightmare, there wasn't a whole lot to analyze at the time. But since enough time has passed, people have started ranking this among the lower end of this lineup. Not in the sense that it's bad, it's just that, as the old saying goes, you never start with your best episode, unless if you're season 3 or even 7 or 8, depending on who you ask. But I wanted to give this episode a second chance. After all, I very quickly noticed plenty to appreciate in the writing and editing specifically. So if I had to estimate what made a majority of people fall off of this episode, it's probably because of...
The winner is Omni Man.
But I don't care about Bardock at all, so I reckon it might be because of the animation. But we'll get there when we get there. Oh, I just noticed that there's this hideous slowdown thing at the beginning. Like, why is that there? Anyways, that's my only problem with the editing, so let me get into why the editing in Omni Man's analysis is basically perfect. Remember how his previous analysis ended with that tear? Well, this analysis begins with that same tear, now being used as a transition, feeling like a natural continuation of his first analysis. And of course, you have DJ's comic book editing in moments like the Mortal Kombat scene animating the Viltrumites brilliantly, the galaxy visuals, the best movie ever mentioned, and our eternal Lord and Savior being animated in Blender, apparently. Top that with Philip Span's sound design as well as some other fun transitions, and the visuals have never been better before. So now let's talk about how the writing is practically the opposite of that. I say this because of one simple reason.
Spoilers! Just go read the comic.
I did, and I wanted them to be covered here. I don't like how they mention his soul-searching journey so nonchalantly after they calc his speed. It makes his arc about realizing that the love for his family was always real and made him stronger feel just as impactful as some boring speed feat they tossed in the beginning of his analysis. Look, in Omni Man vs. Homelander, I can understand why they stuck with the first season of Invincible. It was a new show, receiving a ton of hype, and the matchup was heavily requested almost exclusively because of their respective Amazon shows. That, and I'm pretty sure Omni Man was gonna get a second episode no matter what. But even then, as far as brief analyses were, it felt better paced in terms of story, mentioning Mark as his son, covering the differences in their upbringings, and culminating in how their final confrontation made Nolan realize the error of his ways. But here, they basically say the same thing, but have those pieces haphazardly scattered throughout the rundown. It doesn't feel well written at all, and this is just focusing on what they did include. Remember that they gave that whole
Spoilers! Just go read the comic.
Yeah, that whole thing. And there's quite a bit about his character that is straight up missing. The next season is about to drop, and I'm pretty sure it's gonna cover all of it, so I won't go too in-depth with spoilers for the sake of people who haven't read the comics. Ironic, I know, but like, my reason for it is better. Though I will say that Oliver was pretty crucial to his character arc. And I will say that their first meetup is not only genuinely beautiful, but Oliver actually does contribute quite a bit to Omni-Man's redemption arc. Yes, differently from that. And there's also no coverage of why he betrayed Viltrum or why he even lived on Thraxa in the first place. And yes, all of this would have supported the themes of the matchup. You know, the reason why this matchup existed in the first place, the one that popped up almost entirely due to being an alternative to Omni Man versus Homelander. Glad to see none of that show up in the better Omni Man matchup. As you can see, I've grown to like this analysis less and less as time goes on, and at this point in time, I just straight up don't like it anymore. It's style over substance, the death battle rundown. But I do like Bardock's analysis. I previously said that it may be my favorite Dragon Ball analysis, but I don't quite think that anymore. Just because I've started noticing the compositing problems that some friends of mine have been pointing out. Like, they say that they're mainly focusing on Super, given it's the canon timeline for him, but then they start going into his Super Saiyan form and the time where he got pulled out of the time stream, and it feels inconsistent with Death Battle's set limitations. Although I do gotta say,
outside of his fight with Gas, Bardock doesn't really show any high-end feats in canon, but we can use power levels to compare him to other characters with similar levels to better understand his potential.
I just find this really funny given how passionate certain people got over Bardock losing, because Omni-Man's feats are all from him, while Bardock requires scaling to other characters, and yet some of these same Bardock bros hate it when Death Battle relies on scaling for certain characters. I guess scaling's only an issue when it doesn't favor the character they want to win, Regardless, I still really like this analysis, and it's absolutely one of the better Dragon Ball rundowns in my opinion. Since Bardock doesn't scale to Goku at his peak, they get to cover plenty of lower scale feats, relative to Dragon Ball, obviously, and I still think they do a solid job at merging their analyses of where Bardock's power level should be, what being a Saiyan means, and how his family affected his personality for the better. Max also has some really creative edits, like the color correction in this bandana edit, some simple yet effective manga edits, and Max's sense of humor sneaking in where it fits. And compositing issues aside, I still stand by my praises of how they handled Super Saiyan. They acknowledge that it's more of a what-if scenario, but they argue that Bardock earned it spiritually with not just the comparisons to when Goku received the transformation, but with how they say Bardock started to become the very thing that Frieza feared within the Saiyans. It's an incredible moment of writing that always stuck with me, even as someone who doesn't care about Bardock. But hey, Death Battle helped me finally understand the hype behind the character beyond just being another aura farmer. Though as for the fight, I'd say it's somewhere in between my thoughts on each analysis. Starting with my first problem, the characterization. I do quite like the voice acting from Tom Shock and Kamran Nikad, the former of which I feel was an improvement over his already iconic performance from last time, but the script they're given is where I start to take issue. I don't have as much to say about Bardock's, I just think it continues the discrepancy of saying that they're focusing on Super, but then include aspects of his personality from the Toei era, but I at least understand that Super doesn't add a whole lot in general, so the compositing is mostly fine by me, even if other people are gonna take more issue with it than I. But Nolan's, however, is really weird. The characterization they want to focus on is Season 2 Omni Man, which I get, given the time period of the episode. But then they give him lines like this?
Just like my son, sticking his nose in places he's not right to.
Season 2 Nolan would not backhand Mark like that, and he certainly isn't talking about Oliver here. Hell, I don't even think Season 1 Nolan would do Mark like that. Oh, and there's also this pseudo-arc he has where he thinks nothing of Bardock at first, but after he screams the name Saiyan, he ends up being forced to respect the name, attempting that thing from Guts vs. Dimitri, where they give a nice parallel to the winner's character growth in a self-contained pseudo-narrative. I don't know if I would have wanted something like this for a Nolan episode, but does it at least work in the context of the animation? Kinda. If you take everything after that sun line, it's functional, and I also appreciate how the ending is very subtle, and possibly even open to interpretation, even if Nolan's final line should have had a much softer delivery than the one we got. But still, is he grievous about his relapse to his older self, or did he end up honoring Bardock as he falls into the sun? I think it's a pretty good emotional beat. Though, there is one other line I should bring up.
This planet isn't anyone's to conquer.
This is the first line we hear, which makes me think we're starting off with Season 2 Nolan immediately. Heck, the fight itself is taking place on Thraxa, which, while doesn't kill this mini-arc of his, definitely contributes to the inconsistent characterization conundrum, especially if you take it as a demonstration of how Nolan has changed since his previous fight. Even though it was Season 1 Nolan the whole time, at least it was a more consistent portrayal that even added a couple of nice hints at his later developments. But here, it doesn't feel as consistent. It feels like we get Season 2 Nolan, then Season 1 Nolan, then back to Season 2 Nolan, I suppose. And maybe, and that's a big maybe, a loose reference to how Nolan's story ends. Though, I am obviously ignoring the fact that Nolan by the end of his journey has differences from his portrayal here, but it doesn't hinder my opinion as much as the jumbled pseudo-arc he has. Look, I know I've been hyperfixating on the characterization so far, but that's only because I genuinely don't have as much to say about the action. Though if it means anything, I do like pieces of what's here. As simple as it is, the escalation is pretty excellent. It goes from simple brawling with Bardock and Nolan being mostly even, but with Nolan clearly being the superior fighter. Then Bardock transforms into the Uzaru with clipped neck. Okay, and then begins outspeeding Nolan. And then in Super Saiyan, Bardock is just outright blitzing Nolan to a point where he can't even keep track of where he is. And each time, Nolan overcomes each transformation by finding the opening he needs. Very nice back and forth that even includes a few subtle references here and there. Though if there is anything to nitpick, I would point out moments like Nolan blocking the giant ki projectile taking too long, Nolan not being visible enough when he gets hit by the ki barrage, and both instances of Nolan with the Uzaru tail where the framing is either too fast or too slow. I am aware that the storyboards do a better job at showing the damage Nolan received, and while I can see the argument for how it got lost in translation, it's not like Nolan takes no visible damage. You can still see Nolan coming out of a bloodbath by the time he fights with a Super Saiyan, though the storyboards do have a scene of his leg getting snapped like a twig, so I still think this critique is reasonable. But I think another concern is, Nolan is talking in space?
Your time is up, Saiyan!
Mega what? And the kill perfectly encapsulates the mixed feelings I have about the fight. As mentioned earlier, I really like the aftermath, but the actual blow itself is just Bardock losing an arm? Bardock went from progressively being one step ahead of Nolan to going down after losing a limb. What a jobber! Why do people like this moron again? But something I am not mixed on is Solid State Invincible. It feels like a perfect sequel song to Diabolical Invincible Me, utilizing a similar tone, but repurposing it. Instead of portraying the impending doom of the characters' prominence on Earth, it portrays the weight of these characters' past, always haunting them. It fits Omni Man because of the tom-tom type beat, and it fits Bardock because of Solid State Scouter's synth rock sound, especially when it incorporates that very motif, with the heroic orchestral variant during the Super Saiyan combo being my favorite use of it. Though, despite this, not everyone wants to talk about this. Y'all know how the internet goes. The verdict is the only thing the vocal minority wants to care about. They've already started calling this the next Ben 10 versus Green Lantern, and I've gotten a handful of comments saying that it's arguably worse. No. That Green Devil will never be surpassed in terms of controversy because it had incredibly specific context to it that no other episode had or will ever have. Did people just forget that its announcement alone practically revived an entire fandom after receiving years of sloppy nothings, and also a reboot that nobody liked? All you can say about the context for Omni Man vs. Bardock is that people disagreed with an opinion on the internet.
Oh no. Anyway.
The only reason it happened to stand out is because this episode was Death Battle's independent debut, so of course it was gonna get talked about. And let me tell you something, I wholeheartedly believe that if this premiered at any other point in time, it would have blended in with every other Saiyan loss the show has done, and no one would be talking about the verdict nearly as much. Hell, this is also one of those conclusions that does no blowballing for Bardock whatsoever. No saying that his energy attacks are still just energy, no saying his power is exclusive to his key attacks or transformations, no saying things like King Vegeta did not actually blow up the whole planet, no saying jargon like how we don't see the point of impact with that planet shot, no implications that the King Vegeta feat was a high ball along with the Viltrum feat being a low ball, and no bad faith soft debunks of any caliber. In other words, no, the episode is not biased against Bardock. Otherwise, his analysis wouldn't be as well written as it is, nor would the transformation scenes have plenty of detail and focus on them. Though that being said, the conclusion still has its problems, just not the ones people might think. But before we go into them, I need to come clean and admit that I spread misinformation following this episode's verdict, and may or may not have been one of the primary driving forces behind said misinformation. I used to say that the episode was debatably wrong by their own logic, but I no longer think this. Even if the speed advantage was significant, not only was it mostly in Super Saiyan, a form that Bardock doesn't even have full control over, but I also completely ignored the stamina advantage that Nolan had, which was very significant given the relatively close numbers. And on top of that, there have been plenty of instances where characters were significantly slower than their opponent, be it by Death Battle's logic, the G1 team's research, or just in general, and they still came out on top. So Bardock should not be any different, especially with Omni Man's significantly better stamina, allowing him to stay in the fight long enough to get the hit he needs. Though, as it turns out, I do not agree with the Universa scaling they put in this black box. Nolan never actually fought Universa to my knowledge, but that's not important. What is important is everybody's favorite thing ever, that Sun Disk. This thing is pretty much the reason why I would argue this episode is far more similar to Sasuke vs. Hiei. Both had the losing character unanimously winning the G1 prediction blog. Both episodes had the underdog get buffed by a feat most people didn't pay much attention to. Both feats got looked at by other versus debaters after the fact and began understanding the logic behind Death Battle's result, even if they got different numbers for it. Both losers got the speed and versatility advantages, and both winners received a lot of justification in the conclusion that their respective analyses didn't quite elaborate on. But unlike Sasuke vs. Hiei, where they didn't want to elaborate extensively in the analysis because this episode does have a reason why there wasn't a lot of elaboration in the analysis.
Spoilers! Just go read the comic.
And now you know why I hate this moment so much. Being transparent, I didn't think I needed to read the comics to explain that Sun Disk, but while writing my notes, I conjured a hypothesis that gave me the push to do so. I was worried that they were deliberately hiding the context for Nolan winning for no reason, but after reading the comics, they thankfully didn't. They didn't cover the full justification. In fact, there was even a moment in the following Death Battle cast where they felt compelled to defend themselves further, but the stuff they cover about the actual Sun Disk is fine. Even if it happened in a brief scene, it was still used as a means of showing how tough the Viltrumites can be, given that Conquest one-shot that very ship. And oh hey look, Death Battle brings that up in a black box. I feel that the issue here is the discrepancy with it being couched significantly higher than the feat from a much more pivotal moment in Invincible's story, which means that no one was expecting Death Battle to scale the Sun Disk this high. Though there is the animated version of this feat, which gets... Holy Tom, I'm very interested to see what result people get for this version. But that obviously was not out at the time of the episode, so going off the comic they had to work with at the time, it sadly didn't convince me, even back then, and it kinda still doesn't now. Mainly because they don't really elaborate on the material the Sun Disk was made of, which I think would have made their argument stronger. But at the end of the day, not every argument is going to convince everybody. Oh well, no use crying over it. Wait, what do you mean the Infinity Ray can cause supernovas? When did that happen? Well, this episode is kind of upsetting to talk about. I like a lot of what's here, from Bardock's analysis to the fight escalation to the music, but speaking as a big fan of Invincible who really likes Omni Man especially, I feel conflicted on the full episode. And what sucks is that I can't imagine a reason why Nolan would get a third Death Battle, so while I did at least get an episode with him that I liked, his final outing on the show was an episode that did not cover the story beats that made him a compelling character, and instead won with a fight that had his representation very volatile. Speaking objectively, I guess, it was good enough for Death Battle's debut, but speaking personally, 55 out of 100. I just can't bring myself to shake off the mixed feelings I have for it. And to think that people acted like Bardock had worse representation. Oh, wait a minute, wasn't there like some sort of event associated with this episode? Let me consult one of my avatars, see if they know something.
Oh, hi there. You scared the crap out of me. Hello, everybody. My name is RaccoonBroVA, and it is my honor to be a guest on Jonathan Frostathan's most epic review of Omni Man vs. Bardock. And I have so many things to share about this episode, but not yet. Not yet. That comes later, when I have my very own review of this season, roughly 10 years or so from now, so you'll have to wait. What I'm here instead for is to give you all my own first-hand personal experience of the Death Battle Life event. I gotta tell you guys, what a friggin' way to celebrate saving the show from certain death. It was so cool, and having this like intimate space for so many birds of a feather to flock together. I met up there with Steve.
I'm here to get fucked up.
And we went down the red carpet. Yeah, they whipped out the red carpet treatment for this thing. You knew they meant business. So many awesome people were there. You got Devil Artemis, you got Luis, you got Aaron from Darewolf Media, you got Danny Shepard. It was amazing. It started off with their reaction that they posted on Twitter to reaching $75,000 within the first 22 minutes. And after that, they revealed the winner of the rematch poll. Everyone went f***ing nuts, man. Let me tell you. They even revealed that it wasn't close at all. It was a landslide. And the funniest part to me was that they had all of the different rematch options, like going through one by one, leading up to the winner. But Ben versus Hal, I guess they forgot to put it in there because there was no PNG for it at all. That was very funny. Until the real show began. Omni Man versus Bardock, and oh my god, I really hope that in the future they do more live events like this, because everybody's reactions to it was just so on point, especially, oh my god, when that death came, because everybody thought Bardock was gonna win. But then when his arm blew off and his body was falling into the sun, you could hear a pin drop. It was so deadly quiet. And then Tom Schulk said, and everybody lost their minds once more. Even more than that, the reaction to that Next Time trailer. Steve, I love you, brother. You know I do. But that was the most epically cathartic thing to see your reaction to. And I'm so glad I got it on video, and I'm so happy that the folks could see what it looks like, the point of view getting flipped off by the man, the myth, the legend, Croatian. After that was arguably the best part of the night, the meet and greet on the deck outside. It was cool, like, seeing all the different things that people brought to get signed. By far the best thing was somebody who made a custom Season 1, Volume 1 VHS of Death Battle, and it had every episode up to Starscream versus Rainbow Dash. Now, the question of the hour. I know what some of you might be thinking. Did Ben and Chad recognize me? They did not. At first. I was like geeking out about the episode, congratulating them and stuff, and then I threw a little hint in there. I was like, yeah, no, I can't wait to make a video about this. And Ben was like, wait a sec, are you Raccoon Bro? Ben, Chad, if you guys like see this video, y'all are the best. Thank you so much, man. That was such a fun experience to have. And of course, like, shout out to everybody else I got to talk to there as well. Danny and Lisa are so cool. I love Luis, like Devil and Luis, they signed my Death Battle hat along with Ben and Chad. Thank you, Death Battle, for putting on such an awesome event like that. It was a straight up party, and I really hope y'all do it again sometime, because that would be so epic. And now, back to something equally as epic. Take it away, Jonathan.
Hey Persona 5, long time no see! Last time I talked about you was in that one video from about, say, 5 years ago, where I made a pretty in-depth critique of the game's dialogue, with how non-existent its subtlety is to a fault. And then I compared it to the superior dialogue from the superior game, Tales of Berseria, all with the help of my big boy English major with creative writing focus, and to an extent one of my college professors. I am not making that up. But again, almost 5 years ago, man. It almost feels like I've known you all forever. Yeah, I'll fully admit that Vento Audio is my least favorite JoJo part, and Giorno is my least favorite JoJo by a big margin. And on top of that, Persona 5 Royal is still the only Persona game I've played, and I'm not really interested in playing the other games as I have other JRPGs and even other games with an emphasis on Japan's city life to keep me cozy. Though if you really want me to play the other games, pay my rent for a year, then I'll play Persona 4. And yet despite this, why was this the matchup that got me the most excited out of nearly this entire lineup of episodes? For those who may not know, this was planned to be the premiere of the original Death Battle Season 11, which was an incredibly bold move because of how contentious the debate was. But whether it was because Persona got proper research and scaling to Shin Megami Tensei, or because Omnidot gaslit people into thinking that things can't get much worse than this, even though they have, or maybe because the verdict was explained really well, or because many people, myself included, just wanted Gold Experience Requiem to lose, and we did get that, or because someone somewhere sometime manipulated everybody's brains into calming down. This didn't become controversial at all. Though personally, I was just happy to see Joker vs. Velvet Crow get shot dead in the water where it belongs. Man, to think that there was a time where it was considered Velvet's best matchup makes me want to vomit blood on the spot. The reason why my excitement for this episode grew was because I've been growing a bigger and bigger respect for this matchup over time, even though it's only my third favorite Joker matchup. Legioness and Lot Cole. And Giorno was a character I wasn't interested in seeing on Death Battle at all. Care to take a guess why? But I gotta admit, a thorough dive into the connections as well as the episode sneak peek convinced me that this matchup could be a really cool episode. The waiting period felt like the truth of Persona scaling and Gold Experience Requiem's abilities and limits were slowly unraveling until the full extent was revealed by the G1 blog. Like, no, seriously, the G1 team does not get nearly enough love for how much work they put into their blogs. But the episode did just as good of a job in spite of how overlooked and slept on it is. Joker's analysis to me felt like Dragonborn's analysis. Except I'm in on the jokes they make, so I actually find them funny. Sure, they make a couple of obvious memes like, "Date my teachers!" Spin-off Hell and the Morgana slander, God bless. But they also do some subtle gags like referencing Mr. Ushimaru's chalk throwing habits, Mara showing up in a painting next to Jesus Christ as Wiz says,
Jesus Christ!
a quick and simple jab at Facebook, and even a couple meta jokes like the social link sound effect playing when Makoto shows up in the name dropping of the other Phantom Thieves, signifying how she's the most popular girl of the Persona 5 cast. And there's also the cutaway gag, perfectly referencing the player's intent to max out a confidant's stats and ignore them the rest of the game. Hey, as someone who platinumed P5R, this hits home. I make the comparison to Dragonborn's analysis because they're both less about the story and world building and more about the fandom memes, or at least the comedic sides of those fandoms. But another reason why Joker's analysis works better for me, apart from having way more experience with P5R than Skyrim, is that the jokes are faster paced and have more variety to them. Dragonborn's rundown only consisted of jokes that are just Boomstick says a funny, and then the funny thing is shown on screen. And the other ones are an overabundance of music cutoffs and a Sheogorath name drop. It works for people who like those jokes, but my name is not people who like those jokes. And yeah, Joker's analysis has this type of writing as well, but it at least has some visual comedy and even a layered joke here and there. Plus, the lack of story doesn't hinder the rundown as much for me. Not only do they still give some substantial world building, unlike in Dragonborn's, but Ren as a character, while has more to his personality than one would think, is a relatively flat character. He has his struggles, he has his developments, he has stuff going on, especially in Strikers from what I've heard. He has a character, but Persona 5 as a game doesn't ruminate it on it as much. And that's because he's one of those characters who helps the other Phantom Thieves grow and rise above their struggles, rather than someone with a character arc that much of the story is based around. And the episode frames him exactly like that. A high school student who goes through a lot of weird social situations, but is never afraid to rise up and challenge corrupt authority while helping his friends do the same for their personal demons. And in return, the other Phantom Thieves are made to feel important, given how the social links are established. It is played off for comedy more than it isn't, but their role in Joker's story is told in a much more subtle way. They go into how Ren's friends helped him and what it means in a versus sense, literally saying they make Joker as strong as the gods he battles. It's an absolute masterclass of seamlessly blending story and versus analysis, boiled down in a way that casual viewers can understand, while reserving the higher dimensional stats for the black boxes for those who are more interested in that kind of thing. The only issues I have here are...
Or Yaldabaya!
That is not how you say Yaldabaoth. And I am curious as to what they mean when they say Joker can summon Satanile on his own. Maybe he does so in Strikers, I don't know that, but the only place I can think of is in New Game Plus, which I don't know if I can consider canon, but this episode takes some liberties with what is canon and what isn't, so Joker social links probably allow him to do that anyway, so it's not a huge deal to me. But what is a huge deal to me, however, is Giorno's entire analysis. Not gonna sugarcoat it, is my least favorite analysis of this whole lineup. And aside from Nolan's, Giorno's rundown is the only one of this lineup that I would say is outright poorly written. I get that Gold Experience is an immensely versatile stand and Requiem is really complicated in how it works, and I'm not asking for the episode to shorthand it for the sake of a character study, but there's a difference between giving an analysis that happens to tip the scale closer to the respect thread than the respect of a character, and covering the first part of a character's backstory and nothing else. I know what I said about Giorno, but that doesn't mean I don't want Death Battle to highlight the qualities that make him interesting. Giorno is much more than just his powers, and to give you an idea, let's touch upon an aspect of Part 5 that people like to bring up as a criticism. Giorno is the son of Dio and I, yet the story, or his character, never revolves around it. I've always found this to be a bad faith and outright stupid criticism, and I say this because literally, yes it is. You see this trait all over Giorno's personality and character interactions. His personality meshes the golden heart and courage of the original Joestar with the resilient ambitions and charisma of its millennia-spanning nemesis. And we see this come to fruition in how he emphasizes his dream to become a gangstar, where he yearns to climb his way to the top by any means necessary to change society for the better. And we also see this in how he acts around Team Bucciarati, where he earns their trust due to his resilience and resolve, but is also able to express empathy of their flaws and upbringings, while actively encouraging them to be the best they can be. We see this in his actions towards corrupt members of Passione, where he's able to recognize true evil and defeats it with its cunning tenacity, malicious judgment, and unwavering sense of justice. Aspects that aren't massively dissimilar to every other Joestar before and since, sure, but seeing it complemented by the personality traits he gained from Dio Brando of all people is what makes Giorno a character I find relatively interesting to talk about. Hell, Death Battle has the perfect outlet to frame Giorno in this exact light because Dio and I were on the show before, which grants a lot of potential to explain what makes Giorno distinct from them, how it strengthens his character, how it strengthens his stand, how he uses his stand power. Take a guess as to what the analysis refused to do for some reason. Let's start with the first problem. The characters from Golden Wind that get name dropped, or even alluded to, are outnumbered by the references to characters from every other part from the first continuity.
Like stopping time, making fiction into reality, or cooking Italian food, goddamn!
How in the hell is it possible to ignore the existence of the goated Guido Mista for the entire analysis just so Bohemian Rhapsody of all things gets mentioned? Well, I mean, it's not too big of a deal because I'd argue that's the best fight from part 6. Wait, who said that? Dio stand getting referenced makes sense, but what doesn't make sense is that Gold Experience and King Crimson are the only stands from part 5 that get mentioned. Oh, wait, sorry, Sticky Fingers gets mentioned too, which was exclusively used as scaling for Gold Experience, but in my defense, the episode clearly forgot about that too, lest we forget the man who wields the stand in question. Hell, they make more references to gangster and mafia media than any character in part 5. Liam Swan, I hope Team Bucciarati gets manifested when you encounter Civil War! And this is a problem because it somewhat undermines the journey Giorno goes on. Not in any malicious way, to be fair, but by skimming over the vast array of stand users that battle Team Bucciarati, it means that the analysis is speed running Giorno's path to the top to focus on the stand powers more than necessary. And each of these stands are from antagonistic members of Passione, so they would be perfect as segues into shaping Giorno's personality and convictions, while remaining open to complementary versus analysis, even if it's mainly from a hack's perspective. But instead, nah. Pearl Jam clearly needs more priority despite Giorno not even knowing what that is. Oh, but we mentioned Diavolo, so problem solved, I guess. But even then,
Diavolo.
That is not how you say Diavolo. Also, I'm not sure how I feel about how they framed him as someone who wanted a stand arrow, even ignoring his true goal, which was to rule Italy with a Crimson Fist. He already had a stand arrow by the beginning of part 5, which, while it got destroyed, along with Polpo, Diavolo was looking for a specific stand arrow with a beetle carving, which is the only one of the 6 arrows that can evolve stands. The other ones simply make stands appear for the person it stabs. Okay, this specific point is pretty minor in the grand scheme of things, but given how they introduced the symbolism of Dio and Diavolo with Giorno in the center of it, it sucks that they never use it as a subtle parallel with Giorno's actual character. But ultimately, my biggest problem with this analysis is simple: the lack of Jonathan mentioned. There's a lot more emphasis on Giorno being Dio's son than being a Joestar, so this framing completely misses the mark of Giorno being a hero. Rather, he's framed as something of a low-key monstrous character, which is, a choice? And given how well written Joker's analysis was, I don't get what happened with Giorno's here. In fact, I know that people are going to disagree with me on this, but I wholeheartedly believe that Jotaro's analysis was better. Yeah, it may have the same problem, but it at least has the excuse of being the first JoJo analysis, which means there were no expectations for how good the writing could be. That, and they at least acknowledge that Jotaro is still a hero. Giorno's analysis couldn't even do that somehow. Now do you see why I refuse to hop aboard the hashtag #LetLiamCook train? Because that man caters chum bucket flavored nothing burgers just as much as he caters the finest seasoned prime rib, as well as the most delicious vegetable lasagna on the fucking planet for vegetarians like myself. But with that said, it's not all doom and gloom. It at least has an accurate coverage of Gold Experience and Requiem while doing a great job at helping casual viewers comprehend its attributes. Plus it also had a couple of okay jokes here and there.
That's right, Boomstick.
Oh god bless, they finally said it again. But it doesn't change how the respect thread is coupled with a faulty character study that misses the point of Giorno's character. And being honest, this kind of extends to the fight as well, as Giorno is far more Dio-coded than I would like. Let me show you what I mean. This may not seem like much, but this kanji right here is the exact kanji used during Dio's first appearance in Phantom Blood. Hell, he even sits in the throne similarly to Dio in the Phantom Blood opening. That, and his personality is more akin to Phantom Blood Dio as well, with his flamboyant postures and the venom in his close-ups. And he also lectures Joker on what justice means, but there's no real insight into what that could be. And I feel like this all could have been alleviated if there was a proper setup. I'm aware that this is the only way a fight could work, and I think that the references to Dio are fine on paper, but the lack of context for why Giorno has a palace is my main problem. Not to say that he shouldn't have one, especially since good, well-meaning people like Futaba and Sai have had palaces as well, but there's always a reason for it, specifically a corruption of one of the 7 deadly sins. And I reckon Giorno's would be Wrath, but I don't know this for sure, because there's no insight into why Giorno has a palace. And it's not like they need to be elaborate, literally just show us what's on that calling card he was holding, and it'll all come together. But you know what? Aside from that, along with scant bits of jank and stiff posing, this animation is fundamentally perfect. Like, seriously, this is one of my favorite animations of the indie era. And dare I say, one of my favorite sprite animations as a whole. The choreography, the quantity versus quality dynamic, the unique visuals, the JoJo color correction finally being incorporated properly, the voice acting, the music. Requiem for a Thief is so good, man! It's It's a wonderful piece that combines the rock jazz of JoJo and Persona 5 with some flaming layers of jazz guitar and that ever so sexy mofo. And wait, did they layer it with the violins too? Nice! It feels like Joker storming a palace. It feels like Giorno just hit his opponent with that Uno reverse card. It nails the vibe that you would find in both series as Forest Child's vocals replicate Lin Inaizumi's vocal technique almost perfectly, all while giving us that epic piano during the Requiem scene for good measure. If I said I like this track more than Persona 5's entire soundtrack combined, would that be very controversial? Anyway, back to the fight dynamic. As I implied earlier, this sold me on how the fight could be interesting. Giorno's powers don't negate everything Joker does, nor does he no-sell Joker's attacks, but they're absolutely forced on Joker's radar. We see this in the perception manipulation, the bullets being turned into bees before eventually returning back to the gun, and everything about Requiem in general. And decoding aside, there are moments where Giorno's real personality gets to shine through. He's analytical, he calculates Joker's options, and he comes off as tenacious. Every action he does is more in line with his fight scenes, where he always feels like he's one step ahead of his opponent through an unexpected action. And likewise, Joker gets to be just as strategic, just as confrontational, and just as much of an adaptive force, leading to some essentially perfect back and forth between them. When Giorno notices the power of Arsene, he changes his strategy to tag teaming Joker. When Joker gets outnumbered by their teamwork, he summons Alice to swarm Giorno with a mob of exploding teddy bears. You can even see a gradual transition of Gold Experience going from holding them off just fine to overwhelmed by how many are attacking them. And eventually, Giorno gets out of the dog pile and gets rid of the teddies with an AoE attack made from trees. And then when he starts figuring out Gold Experience's life creation abilities, he summons Jack Frost to nullify it with ice. It's also really nice to see that Giorno recognized what Joker was trying to do and pulled out the stand arrow to activate GER. It's not the arrow with the beetle carving onto it, so I don't think it should be able to do that, but the analysis does say Requiem is a permanent ability of his, so who cares? I really like how menacing this hand-drawn shot of Giorno and GER looks. The Return to Zero feature was executed perfectly as we see Joker's willpower reduced with this expression. Kieran Regan's delivery and Muda's are great, and while the recycled animation of the stand rush was pretty obvious, I'm able to ignore that with the following shot of Joker getting punched so hard his tooth falls out. Just like my main man Bruno. In fact, that's probably the best thing about this animation. Every attack feels like it matters significantly. It's one of the shorter episodes of the era, if not the show, so it may be hard to notice, but it's jam-packed with constant tactics that whimsically play off of each other, some that leave a significant impact, and some that just look visually distinct. You can immediately notice this with how GER is almost exclusively shown in a hand-drawn art style, at least until the end, and more apparently, with the entire ending in general. As Joker goes through the death loop, we get a reference to vanilla Persona 5's bad ending, but then we hear Ren's friends calling out to him. Oh, and Akechi's there too.
I'll kill you again myself.
Never change, Pancake Boy. Never change. And this is also where that subtle framing of Joker's friends from the analysis finally gets its payoff, and why the aftermath of this episode's premiere featured many memes involving how Joker won due to the power of friendship. Because the analysis made that power of friendship feel potent, and it got its payoff in the fight. And also the conclusion, but that's skipping ahead. And next thing you know, Satan Isle is in a stylized 3D model. I love how this one looks with the compositing from the already pretty palace lighting. Even the sinful shell is hand-drawn as it overpowers Requiem sprites. I used to dislike this ending because of how it reduces Requiem to a punchy McPuncher. I have come around to at least respecting the ending. Like how the punch rush causes reality all around them to crack at the seams and the stand arrow represents Giorno's heart. Those are some really nice details. And the conclusion? This is just everything that Ben 10 vs. Green Lantern's conclusion should have been. It speedruns the base arguments to focus on how Requiem can compete via negating Joker's initial advantages, while also bringing up multiple methods for how Joker would be able to counter its effects. A lot of people may have hyper-fixated on Eyes of Heaven being used because the game's not canon, but I fully believe that the issue is overblown. They never framed it as definitive proof that Requiem could be overpowered. They likened GER to Maruki's powers in terms of how they could affect Joker. And how it could negate Joker's initial advantages, sure, but Joker still beat Maruki, so I think it's feasible to read between the lines. And they also mentioned how Joker's social links could combat its abilities, how his almighty attacks could bypass Requiem's defenses by using another comparison, and how the omnipotent orb is a perfect counter. This is why they used the phrase backed up in JoJo. It's not being used as the crux of an argument, as the crux was already laid out. Rather, they're just using an example of how GER can be overpowered by stronger reality warping. They've taken this exact approach before with several episodes in the past that didn't receive nearly as many complaints, so I fail to see why Eyes of Heaven would be that much different. Is what I would say if there wasn't one more method that I haven't seen anyone talk about. If you think about it, it's kind of like an inverse of the golden tree moment, where the conclusion introduces a factor that the analyses never brought up, but then it magically shows up in the conclusion as it expects the viewer to see it here. The only other time I can recall something like this happening would be in Bowser vs. Ganondorf? You know, with how Ganon's curse magic wasn't properly brought up until the conclusion, but still mentioned as if the viewer always had it in their mind. But even then, it's within the same continuity they were using, but the idea is still there at least. I just think that if the analysis established in a black box that they were gonna use Eyes of Heaven with the same justification they already laid out, I reckon that this part would be less divisive. I mean, they used All-Star Battle without anybody noticing, so I can't imagine Eyes of Heaven being that big of a leap. Nevertheless, the conclusion's fantastic, just like the full episode, though I do wish I could like it more. It has a slew of elements and subtleties that make it worthy of the Supreme tier for me, but my main issue is that Giorno's representation leaves a lot to be desired, or at least needed that extra pinch of context. Normally this wouldn't be much of a factor, especially since the fight lesson be awesome, but given that he makes up half the matchup, the title, and the thumbnail, it feels like a critical failure on the episode's part. And Giorno's rundown doesn't have any interesting coverage like what Trunks has had, so the highest score I can give it is an 85 out of 100. Guess it didn't kill the episode nearly as much as I thought it would, but I still wish I could rank it higher.
Okay, Junior. Let me know when you start rolling. We've been rolling. You didn't think I'd let such basic assets get tainted by your lard hands, did you? You'd be better off handing it to me. Granted, I've already taken so much from you, but as the old saying goes, you can never have too much, even if it means taking some more. Personal belongings. Do you have any idea who we are, Chrome Dome? My new minions. Guess it's time for a mutiny!
Look, I've already talked about this episode for like an hour or something like that, so I don't really think I have much to say about this episode that I haven't already said. So I won't. Someone else do it.
FTS Deathmatch Makers presents Now, I have long been of the opinion that repetitive series pairings on death battles can get annoying. Your Marvel vs. DCs, your Mortal Kombat vs. Street Fighters, and of course, your Mario vs. Sonics. But even I can't deny that the idea of Bowser vs. Dr. Eggman grew on me fast. And considering I was in the hospital at the time this episode was released, seeing what would eventually become my #1 favorite death battle of all time was a much needed energy/morale boost. Not only is it a villain versus villain matchup that allows for more canonical and realistic brutality than protagonist matchup, Mario vs. Sonic episode 100, I am glaring at you, but it covers the most iconic parts of the games they come from aside from the protagonists. This massive army versus army fight touches on every minor/major enemy you encounter, from World 1-1 to 8-8, from Green Hill Zone to Final Zone. And thanks to Moro's insane attention to detail, almost everyone gets their own minor roles to play alongside the biggest of bads in the title. And I gotta respect a battle that gives the little guys their time to shine. The other main thing that gave this fight and matchup in general a boost is the fact that no matter who won on either side, I would have been happy with the outcome. Either Bowser comes out on top, my Smash Ultimate main and one of my favorite video game villains ever, or Eggman would be completely carried to victory by the GOAT Metal Sonic, who would get a massive death battle redemption from his solo episode. And what do you know? Both things happened. Bowser won, and Metal carried. 10 out of 10. 100 out of 100. Best game. Best game. Well, I said my piece. Thanks again for having me, Jonathan. And, tell your variant of Deadpool to give me a call. We have got to collab on something. Just think of the minor to major petty annoyance we could cause.
No.
Oh shoot, that's right, I forgot to give it a score. 97 out of 100. Yes, it's because of the continuity error. I still don't understand what they were cooking there. And the conclusion also made it seem like Bowser stomps when I know for a fact that the team does not think that. Yes, this is yet another instance of the presented research low-key contradicting what the team actually thinks.
3, 2, 1, dance!
What a way to follow up on the most beloved death battle. One that's much more lighthearted, goofy, silly, and the bane of one's existence. So, we all know that promo animation Larry Winwood made for this matchup, yes? Well, that got so much attention from the crew that they made it into a death battle cast. Then they put it on the Champions Ballot from 2022. And 2 years later, it became an episode. Even if everyone memeing it to death burnt out some people.
Alright, I get it!
Understandable, but I don't know, I've always thought it could be fun. And hey, Larry got to animate for this episode, and it wasn't even a one-off. He officially works for the show now, and that's awesome. They say Sackwell stocks have officially risen in more than just the Raptorverse. But does that mean I think this episode was a great start for him? Well, I'll get into that now. This episode is going for a more comedic route. Not saying that this is a joke episode, as there is a difference. Joke episodes are based around a joke, usually one that involves the matchup or one of the characters, while comedy-centric episodes are regular episodes with legitimate matchups that just happen to have more jokes in them. Though, ironically, Among Us vs. Fall Guys seems to be going for a combination of both this time around. The Among Us analysis has an overarching theme, but to convey that theme, it uses jokes. Jokes that you could probably find in any other episode, but there's a higher emphasis of them due to that theme. For me, the funniest parts of this analysis are within the editing, and to an extent the writing. Max's editing is simpler this time around, but one that works to his benefit. There are more emphasis on visual gags from the recorded footage as opposed to any laugh-out-loud funny jokes. A lot of the footage consists of the Death Battle team members playing Among Us with each other, Wiz and Boomstick get their own crewmate designs, the meeting cutaway gag representing different kinds of Among Us players. It's all fun, and I respect this approach because it creates the illusion that the Death Battle, crew is learning about the crewmates in real time. I especially like how Jocelyn is acting so casually, agreeing with everyone without actually paying attention to what's being said, yet coming across so into it that she successfully fools everyone into thinking that she isn't an imposter. I also find it funny how this was blatantly changed from the sneak peek where Boomstick was able to successfully figure out that Wiz was not the imposter this time around. I guess it was his turn to get prep time for the full episode. Plus you have other fun visual gags like Ringmaster haunting the players after he was ejected, a nod to the imposter versus the Thing, and their feats being less actual combat accomplishments and more ridiculous things like the chicken nugget price. What? I also like the juxtaposition of how it starts off trying to figure out what kind of monsters they are, but finish it off with a wholesome ending on how they do everything together. Though this ending does kind of come out of nowhere since they're discussing them being everywhere and making Boomstick uncomfortable, but it's still a fun way to conclude an analysis. Though it also has Henry Stickmin content.
That's right. Me making the Among Us preview was just an elaborate ploy to get the Death Battle team interested in Henry Stickmin, so we'll eventually see it on the show.
I knew Henry Stickmin was an industry plant. I knew it! The Fall Guys goes for a similar structure of analyzing their biology, starting off by wondering how these silly beans weave through all those wacky obstacles, and then they start getting into some facts that feel creepy, like how they're naked, how they're 6 feet tall, how this picture and this tweet are both official, how you would never want to see one of them in a dark alley, how they eat food through their feet.
There's so much!
And how the beans are apparently living through some kind of vicious cycle. Not only do I feel like this analysis builds up the joke better, but the tonal whiplash also hits you harder because even though it also feels like it comes out of nowhere, it felt more intentional thanks to the better utilized music choices. It's also humorously lampshaded at the end. While I do think the Among Us analysis has better, smaller moments, the Fall Guys analysis has a better structure, and the meteor joke I thought was the funniest joke in the episode. of the episode. Okay, I'll put my cards on the table right now. I do not enjoy the fight very much. I do like the beginning part though, where it starts off with all the beans in the skeld, and you get some subtle character moments with them. Some of them foreshadow who the imposters are. Some of them show cute character moments, and some of them led to a shipping fest for some reason, but who am I to spoil their fun? Then we get a really good hand-drawn shot that's instantly followed up with the sprite animation of a kill, and then everyone gets ejected. Okay, sure. I mean, we do gotta have the Fall Guys representation somehow. After all, we'll finally get an expansion on Larry's promo animation, and oh, wait, we have screenshots of the action instead of any animation, and none of them are funny. Okay, we eventually have them jumping on a platform, and then one guy gets hit by a ball, and there's a clearer focus on how the Fall Guys are focused on the crown, while the crewmates are focused on their tasks, but are also trying not to die. Oh, too late. Then the first imposter gets hit by a spinning pole trying to kill the pink guy as he effortlessly dodges the knife swipe. Okay, cool to see the contrast in their mannerisms result in someone's undoing. Then the pink guy gets the crown, and as Boomstick said, you know it's always the red ones, albeit disguised as a purple guy. Damn it, Ben! And okay, I misspoke earlier. This is what I think is the funniest joke of the episode. The comedic timing is perfect, with jackhammer sound effects and Aaron's Mickey Mousing that gets contrasted by the extreme death metal and orchestra hits. After this, it goes buck wild with the arsenal usage and animation. The latter because the sprites are no more. Everything is hand-drawn. And the former because the crewmates become ghosts and start using all of their weapons. The guys use all of their crossover abilities, and even the Henry Stickmin gadgets start coming into play, like the teleporter, which never seems to work.
Hey.
Though it's weird how the Fall Guys that got eliminated didn't die. Don't question it. Also, it's doing that thing from Naruto vs. Ichigo, where it's throwing every power and transformation they have at the wall at once. Or Sasuke vs. Hiei if you want to be wrong. But this episode feels self-aware about it enough, so that's fine by me. Wait, did I just hear a melee screw attack sound effect layered in there? Must be hearing things. I do like the TARDIS into Power Sword combo. The pink guy uses the TARDIS to leave the area, and when it comes back, it announces that they have the power! It's one of the more underrated jokes of the fight to me, because it feels like it went back in time to steal the Power Sword. Yeah, that's just brilliant. Though the sword fight in question is pretty basic, but it at least has some engaging camera tracking. Then the crown comes back, and he reaches for it, and more screenshots that go on for too long. Near the end of the fight. Wait, didn't Wario vs. DDD get criticized for doing this exact thing in one fall? Okay. To be fair, I don't think there are as many people criticizing that part of the fight anymore. But I never had an issue with it myself. Not just because they were shorter, used as flashbacks, and actually animated, but it also added quite a bit to the pseudo-narrative, shocking the viewer, or at least the audience, with how they have something of a history with each other, and is absolutely a twist you would find in a mock WWE match. Whereas here, they all say the same thing. The pink guy doesn't want to lose the crown, even though he already got the crown, so I find it to be more of a time waster than a funny moment, especially with how fast the kill is.
I thought you were strong.
Okay, despite my framing, I don't think it's much of a problem. I think the lamp shading and brightness correction work really well for the bit, and of course it ends with Fortnite dancing. I have a soft spot for this kind of thing. And as for the music, Sussy Beans as a track, I liked way more than I thought I would. It has a simple but effective motif, the instrumentation is every bit as bizarre as it needs to, and it scores the fight sublimely. But then there's a conclusion, and it's fine, but this is also the first time where I can say that it did not need the categories. Saying that the crewmates have more destructive capabilities, but the Fall Guys' arsenal is better equipped to tank those weapons and dish out stronger blows, it's a less arduous way of explaining things. Although, having said it out loud, maybe not, but Boomstick still simplified it in this conclusion. This is a nitpick, and there's nothing inherently wrong with the post-analysis. And I like seeing the crown on the final category, as well as Jocelyn finally winning their game of Among Us. With that said, at the risk of doubling down in the most obnoxious genre of ways, the reason why I felt more nitpicky than usual about this fight is ultimately because I just wasn't too impressed with it. I'll own own up to how it takes a lot for me to enjoy a comedy-centric episode, let alone a joke episode. But I think the reason why Deadpool vs. the Mask and Scooby vs. Courage work better for me is because I feel more immersed in the jokes they're telling, and with how they go all the way with them. Among Guys started off that way in the analyses, but I actively dislike how the fight skims over the Fall Guys game for stuff that doesn't appeal to me. It has plenty of functional jokes, a couple of which even made me laugh out loud, but my personal problem is the core of the fight dynamic. But I also don't think the episode is bad. Otherwise, I wouldn't be giving it a 64 out of 100. Definitely an episode that I respect more than I actually enjoy, but there are two E's in the word respect, just like the glee that it's clearly filled other people with. Oh, and this? Hey, if this was supposed to be a Tales of Destiny reference instead of a Danganronpa reference, then I would have given this episode a way higher score. But I guess Death Battle's just too scared to know ball. Oh, and speaking of ball, I'm pretty sure this avatar of mine knows what that is.
Hello, you may have noticed that I am both gum and ball. This has broken several fields of science. Speaking of science, Among Us vs. Fall Guys is yet another joke episode that seems to have split the community cleanly in half. I don't know what it is about joke episodes, but either you really like them, or your enemy is God himself. There's no follow-up. People just really don't like joke episodes sometimes. It's mind-boggling. As for me, I understand that joke episodes are usually a one-and-done when it comes to their reception. You can't really laugh at the same joke, or at least as hard the second time around. But for me, there's something about this episode has some staying power that other episodes don't. One, I think it's just one of the best episodes to look at. There's so many hand-drawn sequences. The fucking segment where Ted gets slapped around like a doofus. The jokes in this one just kind of feel timeless in the way that something like SpongeBob would. Everything clicks, everything works, even the gore aspect, which seems to be the most divisive, really lands for me because, like, it's so excessive that it's comical. And it's not like these are pre-established characters with personalities and stuff to get attached to, so they made their own. Every character has that one thing that'll stick in your mind. You know, as well as they can for mute characters who are on screen for a grand total of like 4 seconds. Now, I don't think it's like a perfect episode or anything. I'm not sure if it cracks the top 5 of my personal ranking. And a large part of that is the information that they say and get wrong. The very basics of Among Us are lost on the Death Battle team. Like how in a 5-person lobby, there's 2 imposters. That doesn't work, by the way. In the opening graphic that reveals that you're a crewmate, there's an imposter in the front of the screen. That does not work. Beyond that, I don't think there's anything overly negative to hold against the episode, and even if I don't mind the stuff that they did get wrong, I kind of have to dock points just for the notion of them getting it wrong in the first place. When there's so little official information to go off of these characters, it's going to stick out a lot more. Beyond that, I'm not sure how to compliment this episode other than it looks good, and it's really funny, and it makes me go ha-ha, and it's like top 6. Maybe, just maybe, I need to be medically evaluated. I'm gonna go to medbay. I sure hope I do not get stabbed by a random man.
Hey.
Oh, so that's where I knocked him? Nah, he'll live. And if he doesn't, I can just revive him.
Next time on Jonathan Frostathan.
How can you love what I do, but hate who I am? Somebody give me an answer. 'Cause I don't understand. I wasn't raised like that. Wasn't part of the plan. How can you love what I do, but hate who I am?
First time?